In our headlines on this Wednesday, August 2nd, here in South Korea. For the first time in 4 years, Korea raises its heat wave alert to serious, the highest level with temperatures hovering at 35 degrees Celsius for 3 days in a row in over 40% of regions nationwide, covered by weather forecasters. And Korea's consumer price index rises 2.3% on year in July, slower than June's 2.7% annual acceleration amid plunging oil prices. But pundits warn of variables, given the potential broader rain-related repercussions on agricultural products. Meanwhile, thousands of teenagers are gathered here in Korea to partake in the 25th World Scout Jamboree with a grand opening event scheduled for Wednesday evening and diverse activities until the 12th of August. Authorities are sounding the alarm over the blistering heat here in Korea, with their emergency response team activating its stage 1 of operations. Our issue tells us what this means.
South Korea's Ministry of the Interior and Safety activated the first stage operation of its Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure headquarters on Tuesday evening. It also raised its heat wave alert level to serious, the highest level above attention, caution, and alert for the first time since 2019. The level serious is issued when the highest feels-like temperature of the day is forecast to reach 35 degrees Celsius for 3 days or more in over 40% of nationwide weather report districts, or when the temperature is expected to hit 38 degrees Celsius in 10% of the weather districts. Previously, the level alert had been issued on July 1st. The Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters has ordered related ministries and regional administrations to take special care of those who work outdoors, such as farmers or construction workers, as well as the elderly. The headquarters also asked them to come up with measures to prevent damage to fishing and farming industries and manage public infrastructure like roads and railroads. Meanwhile, the nation is experiencing what's called tropical nights, with sweltering heat making it difficult to sleep. Tropical nights are when the lowest temperature overnight is 25 degrees Celsius or above. In the midst of these heat waves without a respite, experts explain that it's important to minimize heat exposure.
It's not just about the absolute temperature, but also about how long for and where you're exposed to the heat. Even at the same temperature, the risk of heat stroke or heat exhaustion cranks up if you're exposed to the heat for a long time or working in a confined, humid environment.
To prevent heat-related illnesses, it's necessary to stay hydrated and be aware of one's own body condition. Dizziness, nausea, and headaches are common symptoms of heat-related illnesses. Move to a cool place if you feel unwell and don't hesitate to reach out for help or see a doctor. 이시후, Arirang News.
Beyond borders, neighboring China and Japan have been battered by separate typhoons, one of which may be headed our way. Our Lee reports.
Typhoon Doksuri, meaning eagle in Korean, which slammed northern China from Sunday night, has left at least 20 dead and 33 missing in the capital Beijing and the nearby Hebei province. Authorities are calling it one of the strongest storms to hit the region in over a decade, as homes and roads were heavily flooded due to the massive rainfall the typhoon brought. In response, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for an all-out search and rescue operation aimed at people missing or trapped in floods, while demanding greater efforts to minimize casualties. The Chinese Finance Ministry announced it would allocate $15 million for rescue work in the Beijing-Tianjin-Hebei region. Over in Japan, Typhoon Kanun brought torrential rains and strong wind to the island of Okinawa on Tuesday, which is also home to a number of U.S. military bases. Meteorologists in the U.S. have labeled Typhoon Kanun a Category 4 storm on the 5-category wind scale, while Japanese authorities issued a stern warning to the 760,000 residents in Okinawa to evacuate their homes immediately. However, experts are having a hard time trying to pinpoint where Kanun will hit next.
Because the subtropical high to the north of Kanun is not stable, and there is a tropical convection to the east that is quite active, which will have a certain impact on the path of Kanun in the later stages.
While the typhoon is expected to hit Shanghai, storm path models released by South Korea, the U.S., and experts in Europe all show different predictions. Weather authorities here in South Korea say if Khanun does pass by the Korean peninsula, it should arrive this coming weekend at the earliest or next week at the latest. With Khanun's powerful winds, authorities are keeping a close eye on the storm while making all necessary preparations in case the storm does hit South Korea. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And in other news, Korea's inflation remained on the 2% range in July as well, amid dramatic drops in global oil prices. But pundits fear a potential rebound in broader consumer prices amid the impact of the weather factor on agriculture. Our economics correspondent Moon Hae-ryun explains.
Consumer prices in South Korea continue to slow in July despite rising vegetable prices following the heavy rain and flooding. Data from Statistics Korea show that the Consumer Price Index, a key gauge of inflation, rose by 2.3% compared to the same month last year. This is the lowest figure seen in over 2 years and marks the 6th month in a row that the on-year rise has fallen.
The key factor behind slowing inflation is a drop in oil prices, which have dropped on year at the largest rate since data was first compiled in 1985.
But given a resurgence in oil prices amid rising summer demand and tightening global supply, this effect may wear off soon, on top of more expensive vegetables. Compared to the previous month, vegetable prices jumped by over 7%. This is largely due to price increases for vegetable crops affected by the heavy rainfall that hit the country last month. According to the Korea Agro-Fisheries and Food Trade Corporation, the prices of lettuce and spinach more than doubled within the space of a month. The price of cucumbers also rose by 17% and spring onions by over 23%. With these vegetables among the 144 products measured in the Consumer Price Index for daily necessities, the related index rose by 1.6% on year. And the extreme heat which has gripped the country for the past week or so could continue to affect consumer prices. Owing to the volatility of food prices, Statistics Korea takes an average between 3 values taken throughout the month. As a result, the effects of weather conditions such as rainfall or a heat wave is not greatly reflected in the Consumer Price Index.
While the effects of the monsoon were partially reflected in July's data and may continue to affect the index in August, vegetation also has a short growth period, so it's difficult for us to predict what will happen in August.
Core inflation, as measured by the OECD excluding volatile categories such as food and energy, was up by 3.3% in July, the lowest growth since April last year. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And Korea noted the third deepest drop in economic performance per person among major countries last year. A parliamentary analysis of data from the OECD and the World Bank shows Korea's GDP per capita plunging 8.2% to $32,142 in 2022. The only other major countries that posted greater plunges were Japan and Sweden. Seoul Central Bank is linking the poor performance to the local currency, which weakened 12.9% against the US dollar. Korea ranks 23rd in terms of GDP per capita among the 47 countries in the data, unchanged from 2021. Fitch Ratings has lowered its credit rating for the US government, citing deepening debt and political polarization. Our Ian Jin reports.
Fitch Ratings, one of the 3 major independent agencies that assess creditworthiness, on Tuesday downgraded the U.S.'s long-term foreign currency issuer default rating from the top rating of AAA to AA+. The agency stated that the downgrade reflects expected fiscal deterioration over the next 3 years, a high and growing general government debt burden, and the erosion of governance. Fitch said it had noted a steady deterioration in governance over the last 20 years, flagging the possibility of a downgrade and placing the country's rating on negative watch on May 24th, at the time citing political brinksmanship over the debt ceiling. In June, the government succeeded in lifting the debt ceiling to $31.4 trillion, but only after a drawn-out political battle which threatened to push the country into default. The risk, along with the 2021 January 6th insurrection, were major contributing factors to the agency's latest downgrade. Fitch also noted that a combination of tightening credit conditions, weakening business investment, and a slowdown in consumption could lead the economy into a mild recession in the fourth quarter of 2023 and first quarter of next year. Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen disagreed with Fitch's downgrade, saying in a statement that the change was arbitrary and based on outdated data. She added that the Treasury Secretaries remain the world's preeminent safe and liquid asset, and the American economy is fundamentally strong. The White House had a similar view, saying it strongly disagreed with the decision. The first and only other time that the U.S. has faced the credit rating downgrade was in 2011, when S&P lowered its rating from the outstanding AAA to an excellent AA+. It was following a similar debt ceiling crisis that resulted in protracted negotiations. Ian-jin, Arirang News.
Staying in the U.S., former President Donald Trump has been indicted yet again. The latest indictment was filed on Tuesday by a federal grand jury accusing Trump of spreading lies to overturn the result of the 2020 presidential election. The charges include conspiracy to defraud the U.S. and conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. Investigation was centered on the events surrounding the January 6 Capitol riot 2 years ago when pro-Trump supporters stormed Congress to protest President Joe Biden's victory. Trump is poised to appear at the Washington, D.C. federal courthouse on Thursday. He is also seeking a second term at the White House in 2024. Korea's defense exports to EU and NATO members may become quicker and easier. Now, these prospects come in light of simplified formalities by Germany with regard to Korean weapons equipment made with German defense parts. Germany's Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs on Wednesday announced that the new measures will go into effect from September and will benefit EU, NATO and major non-NATO allies, including Australia, Japan and South Korea. At present, it takes some 3 months for Korea to secure approval for both exports of defense equipment to and imports of necessary parts from Germany. Korean automakers Hyundai and Kia saw stellar sales in the U.S. market in July with double-digit expansions. According to findings by the two automakers, Hyundai's sales were up 14% on year, while Kia's were up 13%. For Kia, this is the highest on record for the month of July and marks the 12th month in a row of similar monthly records. Eco-friendly cars in particular boosted sales. Thousands of teenagers from far corners of the globe are gathered here in Korea to partake in the World Scout Jamboree as its official opening ceremony commences this Wednesday evening. My colleague Choi Soo-young is there.
The World Scout Jamboree, the biggest camping festival for young people, began on Tuesday at Saemangeum, Buan-gun County in South Korea's Jeollabuk-do province. Around 43,000 young people from 158 countries will come together, fostering friendships that bridge racial, religious and cultural divides. This event returns to Korea after 32 years after the country hosted the 1991 edition in Gangwon-do province. But after 6 years of preparation, the venue finally opened with great anticipation.
The World Scout Federation highly praised the successful hosting of the 25th World Jamboree as planned. Additionally, this Saemangeum World Jamboree offers a variety of exciting and memorable programs for young people so that they will cherish their time in South Korea.
Participants from around the world arrived on Tuesday before the official program activities started on Wednesday. They spent the day preparing, including handling the registration process and setting up their tents from morning till late evening. Scouts worldwide are greeted at this welcome center and then move to their assigned accommodation after registration. Despite the long journey to Korea and the scorching heat that left many exhausted, the excitement and joy of meeting new friends, not to mention the anticipation of the 12-day event, were clear to see.
Well, I mostly expect to meet new people, meet internationally new people, get a new network.
Get a lot of new friends from all around the world and experience lots of new stuff here.
Due to Korea's intense summer monsoon flooding the Saemangeum reclamation site until just before the opening, the Scouts managed to create their accommodation by laying plastic pallets and pitching their tents on top. However, despite the extreme weather conditions, the Scouts cherished their camping experience and found joy in preparing for the upcoming programs. The World Scout Federation highlighted how Scout activities help young people overcome difficulties, develop social skills, and be physically healthy. Despite post-pandemic challenges, the Scouts' enthusiasm for the Jamboree in Korea remains undiminished. The opening ceremony will take place at 8 p.m. Korea time on Wednesday. 최수형, Arirang News, Saemangeum.
And Korea is looking to expand its exports of Webtoons as the country's next creative cultural contents into the global market. Our Shin Se-byuk covers the agenda ahead.
The K-content industry has emerged as a major export powerhouse in South Korea, with Korean dramas and movies finding great success abroad. The country is now seeking to become one of the world's top 4 content giants by 2027. As part of these efforts, the government is now shifting its focus to the potential of Webtoons. Data from the Korea Creative Content Agency shows the value of K-content exports reached over $13.3 billion in 2022. Cartoons accounted for only 0.8% of that amount. However, the cartoon sector saw remarkable growth with a 30% on-year increase, making it one of the top 3 fastest-growing segments in the content industry. An expert says what makes Webtoons particularly significant is their use as source material for various screen adaptations.
In the past, novels and comics served as the foundation for a variety of cultural content. Nowadays, Webtoons and web novels, which captivate the younger generation, have taken on the role. And now, these are being exported worldwide.
To foster the Webtoon industry further, the Seoul Metropolitan Government has launched educational initiatives to nurture Webtoon creators and producers.
The core strength of K-content lies in the creativity of its creators. Nurturing that creativity requires providing them with the right talents and a platform to unleash their creative potential.
Through these courses, students have the opportunity to develop their competitiveness as Webtoon creators.
I received valuable feedback and advice from many mentors, which helped me objectively assess my skills. The classes taught me how to direct Webtoons, understand illustrations better, and create trendier comics.
South Korea's well-established web environment also allows it to create more engaging content than other countries.
South Korea's highly digitalized environment further facilitates collaboration between creators.
However, he also expressed concerns about potential diplomatic issues that may arise when exporting Webtoons or K-content, as some content could touch on sensitive topics. To that end, the expert said the government has to take on a role beyond just providing financial support, acting as a mediator to address these issues. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Niger, hundreds of Europeans are being evacuated following a coup. France has sent 3 planes to an airport in the capital Niamey and is offering to help evacuate other European nationals. Germany has encouraged its citizens to take up the offer. And Italy is also organizing an evacuation flight. The evacuations come amid an increasing anti-French sentiment, with coup supporters having gathered around the French embassy for days. The coup leaders have also accused France of plotting a military intervention to reinstate ousted Niger President Mohamed Bazoum. Meanwhile, military juntas in Burkina Faso and Mali have pledged support for the coup leaders. They said that any forcible attempt to reinstate Bazoum would be viewed as a declaration of war. In Paris, armed robbers made off with jewelry valued at up to $15 million. The robbers raided Swiss luxury brand store Piaget on Tuesday local time in an upscale area of the city. According to French media, the suspects, 2 men and a woman, are still at large. They allegedly pulled a gun on staff inside the store, forcing them to hand over jewelry from locked display cases and a safe before leaving. The raid comes a year after armed robbers hit a Chanel watch and jewelry store in the area, while nearby Bulgari and Xiaomi stores have also been robbed in the past. In Myanmar, deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi has received a partial pardon from the military junta that will cut 6 years of her 33-year prison sentence. According to local reports on Tuesday, the Nobel laureate was pardoned in 5 of the 19 cases that the military leadership had brought against her. It comes 1 week after the 78-year-old was moved from prison to house arrest. The former leader has been detained since February 2021, following a coup that began after she won a second term in office by a large margin. The pardon was part of an amnesty given to over 7,000 prisoners to mark Buddhist Lent. It also included a partial pardon for former President Win Myint. And finally, NASA on Tuesday said that it has found a heartbeat signal from the Voyager 2 probe. Direct communication with the spacecraft was lost last month after a wrong command caused Voyager 2 to point its antenna 2 degrees away from Earth. This led to messages from both sides missing each other. But by finding the probe's carrier signal, NASA was able to confirm that Voyager 2 is still broadcasting. It's hoped that a scheduled reset of the probe's systems in mid-October will allow communication to be re-established. Launched in 1977, the probe is designed to study the edge of our solar system. It's currently around 20 billion kilometers from Earth. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Baking heat continues to engulf much of Korea and shows no signs of slowing down. It's also the peak of the summer vacation season, with major expressways packed with vacationers wishing to escape from the sizzling heat. And there's a chance of passing rain in inland areas during the day. Expect to see 5 to 60 millimeters of sudden rain. When it starts to rain, it could pour down, so those near the water need to take the rain into account. The capital area is under burning sunshine with strong UV rays and feels like temperatures to hover around 35 degrees Celsius in most parts of the country. Now, it looks like intense heat will continue through next week, so take care and don't forget to drink plenty of water. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour, but do stay with us for our panel session coming up right after this break. Thank you for now.
Contour the world, simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. You excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
K-animation, loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to reach more children. Traveling time and space. Developing adventure and curiosity. Infinite creativity and hope. We want our children to grow up to be happy. K-animation, watched by children all around the world. So that joy can be felt when our animation is watched. This is the reason we make animation and share with the world. K-animation, befriending children all over the world.
Commemorative events to mark the 70th anniversary of the armistice on the Korean Peninsula were covered by foreign media outlets, with quite a few of them pointing to the starkly different atmosphere in the two countries. So how was the event celebrated in South Korea? Why has Russia's delegation to North Korea's celebration triggered much talk? And what looks to top talks among leaders of South Korea, the US and Japan at Camp David later this month?
Welcome to Issues and Insiders. It's that time of the week yet again during which we touch upon stories here that made headlines elsewhere as well. For this, I have Nicola Smith here in the studio with me. Nicola, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Thomas Oreska with us. Thomas, it's good to have you here.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Right, Nicola, last Thursday, as I mentioned in the clip, the two Koreas marked the 70th anniversary of the armistice that ended active combat on the Korean Peninsula. Now, foreign media, they were very quick to point out the starkly different atmosphere in the two countries. Let's begin with these celebrations here in the country. What were your thoughts?
Well, first of all, it was a very sombre and moving affair, unlike the triumphal celebrations that we saw up north. And there was a strong focus on expressing gratitude to veterans and to allied forces and nations for their sacrifice and their dedication in helping to defend Korea decades ago. And President Yoon led those tributes by saying South Korea today stands on the shoulders of UN forces and on their blood-stained uniforms, which is a very evocative statement. And it was particularly moving to see veterans who were in Busan and who were feted as heroes. They walked down the path of heroes. They were greeted by the president. There was a strong international presence, and still dozens of veterans are now in their 90s, and so they showed a lot of strength and resilience to be outdoors in this incredible heat in Korea. And I went to Busan myself to do some interviews. I interviewed our Armed Forces Minister, and he was very keen to stress support for the veterans and in showing them that in their standing against, the words he used were a belligerent ideological enemy, that their sacrifice had made a difference. And he pointed out the very stark contrast between the repression that we now see in the north of the border and the economic progress in the south. And speaking to veterans as well, it was a real privilege to speak to a couple of British veterans who were here. One of them was telling me that he hadn't been back since 1953, and he was just flabbergasted by what he saw in Busan and saw the high-rise buildings of modern-day Korea, the technological prowess, and he was thrilled to be here, and he recalls the devastation of the war, and he was so happy to see modern Korea and everything the country's achieved.
Right, and all that achievement thanks to the selfless sacrifice, of course, of the veterans. Meanwhile, Thomas, how did the event here, the commemorative event here, perhaps compare to that up in North Korea, do you think?
Well, it was definitely a very different vibe in North Korea. As Nicola mentioned, it was framed as much more of a celebration up there. It's called Victory Day, and, they held a massive military parade, which is kind of the usual. We got to see their latest ICBMs. There was a, unveiling or first sighting of a new aerial unmanned, drone. But, I think the big takeaway for most observers was the fact that there were delegations from Russia and China in attendance. And, the Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, was there, and a member of Chinese Politburo were there at the, flanking Kim Jong-un at the actual parade. And, the day before they had meetings, and Shoigu went to a defense expo with Kim Jong-un. So clearly, signal is being sent that these three countries are kind of tightening up their alliance. This has kind of come on the heels of there's been a lot of reports of North Korea supplying weapons to Russia. I mean, they've denied it, but there's been several different reports, and just even recently the Financial Times did a report that Ukraine soldiers were using North Korean rockets on the battlefield, which I guess they had seized from a Russian ship. There's been talk that obviously the trade, in exchange for food and other supplies to North Korea. And so we're starting to see, more of an alignment. China has also, been ramping up its cross-border trade for the first time in a while since the pandemic. So, and also Russia and China have, for several sessions at the UN Security Council, really blocked any efforts to further sanction or even kind of officially condemn North Korea's missile tests. So, we're seeing kind of this alliance that is enabling North Korea to continue with its weapons development program. And, that's obviously a message that is being sent to the rest of the world, South Korea and Washington.
Right.
Well.
And talking about messages, Nicola, I understand Thursday was also the first time that Russia's defense minister traveled to North Korea since the collapse of the Soviet Union back in the year 1991. Do you suppose these recent trips by the Russian delegation as well as the Chinese delegation, of course, to North Korea to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the armistice is perhaps a statement of sorts to South Korea and its allies, including the US?
Yes, absolutely. I do think it's signalling. It was a very significant visit, as you said, the first since the fall of the Soviet Union. And Defense Minister Shoigu was welcomed with a red carpet and with a personal tour by Kim Jong-un. So it seems that Russia, North Korea and China, to a certain extent, really see it in each other's interests to counter the growing partnership between South Korea, Japan and the United States. Pyongyang in particular is very worried about what it's seeing in terms of Japan and South Korea growing closer together, and obviously South Korea's growing partnership with the United States when we've had a nuclear-armed submarine come to Busan, and also various joint exercises, and we have the trilateral partnership talks coming up this month. So for Moscow, it also gives them the opportunity to frustrate the US-led efforts to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. The image of Shoigu laughing with Kim Jong-un next to intercontinental ballistic missiles that could be nuclear armed and could strike the United States. Also weapons that are clearly threatening South Korea as well, and new drone technology. So those images were very grim, very stark, and it certainly seemed to show that Russia is not even giving any pretense now to try to be a constructive player in diffusing tensions on the Korean Peninsula. As Thomas said, previously they've backed UN Security Council resolutions about sanctioning North Korea and curbing the nuclear program, and they seem to have given that up, any pretense of trying to follow that. And it could also, on the Russian part, be a signal to President Yoon. He recently went to Ukraine. He pledged more support of non-lethal equipment and humanitarian aid. And that could well be a response to that. But it seems that Seoul, as well as Tokyo, are really readjusting their foreign policy and their risk calculations to counter growing threats to national security and prioritising what they deem to be the biggest threats.
Right, indeed. And Thomas, as Nicola mentioned, President Yoon Suk-yeol and his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida, as well as US President Joe Biden, are poised to meet at Camp David, I believe, on August 18th. What do you expect will top the agenda then?
Yes, I mean, again, as Nicola mentioned, you know, it's overall, you know, this kind of is a parallel to what we're seeing from the China, Russia, North Korea kind of grouping. You know, we're seeing definitely strengthening ties among Seoul, Washington, Tokyo. Obviously, North Korea is going to be a serious top-level topic of conversation. You know, beyond that, though, and from what the White House has said, it does, I think, you know, the deepening of the relationship and on the defense side from, they've mentioned sort of, you know, extending the discussion to the regional situation, and they mentioned Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands as areas they're going to discuss, and that has a lot to do with what China is doing in this region. And, you know, definitely Washington has been hoping to kind of strengthen this three-way defense alliance in terms of its, you know, positioning against China, and obviously Russia is going to be another part of that equation. You know, Japan has definitely, I think, stepped forward more aggressively or more, you know, substantially than maybe some people thought. And, you know, I mean, South Korea has obviously also participated in supplying, you know, humanitarian and other aid to Ukraine. So, you know, I think those, just in terms of like this repositioning, this geopolitical shifting of powers, you know, we're seeing this you know, relationship, Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington gaining importance, and just kind of a general positioning of the sort of democracy versus authoritarianism framing as well that Biden likes to talk about a lot. You know, I think also we can see that this really reflects the improving or warming relations between Seoul and Tokyo. I mean, the thought of this happening, you know, within recent years is almost impossible to imagine. And I think this is the first time they've actually had a trilateral, like an official trilateral summit, not a sideline event. And, you know, that has a lot to do with the Yoon administration and the Kishida administration kind of, you know, making an effort. It hasn't always been popular here domestically, but, you know, they've certainly have strengthened their security and, you know, I think other forms of cooperation going forward. And, you know, this also will extend into just kind of economic security issues. There's a lot happening in supply chains and, you know, this sort of semiconductor controls that Washington is trying to impose on Beijing. So, you know, I think that, you know, it has this, North Korea may be a kind of a focal point, but it has a really like wide-ranging.
Right, they have quite a lot on their plate, these three leaders to discuss, of course. And with regard to North Korea's persistent pursuit of weapons of mass destruction, Nicola, and speaking within your capacity as a journalist who has been covering tensions here on the Korean Peninsula, do you suppose that there are other options that need to be further explored in efforts to discourage such nuclear ambitions by North Korea?
Well, that's a very difficult question, and not one that I would presume to know the answer to. You know, it's taken decades to not find a solution. And since I've been in this region, we've gone through several cycles. So I arrived in 2016 in Taiwan, and since then there's been the Fire and Fury and then that moved on to Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un and President Moon Jae-in having their historic talks those didn't go anywhere either, and now we're back to the spiraling tensions part of that cycle. And it's been very clear through all of this that no matter whether you're talking or not, Kim Jong-un does not want to give up his nuclear weapons because this is his security guarantee, and he believes that his own life, his own dynasty could be in danger if he does so. So that leaves you with the question of how to resolve this issue. And there is a school of thought among US academics in particular that one possibility could be just to accept and to recognize North Korea as a nuclear state. But that obviously would be very problematic. It would be very difficult politically for governments. It would cause a lot of alarm in the region. It may also encourage other parts of the world to move towards nuclear proliferation. And so it could be that Kim Jong-un currently is biding his time and waiting to see what happens in the next US elections and where he stands with the next US administration, whether he might consider coming back to the table. But for now, it seems that the best option is to double down on deterrence and basically strengthening alliances, showing the potential cost of taking drastic and foolish action. And that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing with nuclear submarine visiting Busan, with the trilateral talks and with joint military drills.
Right, we are. Thomas, what do you care to add with regard to perhaps proposing a fresh, constructive approach to addressing North Korea's nuclear ambitions?
It's, Nicola definitely covered a lot of the basic problems with trying to move the ball forward. For me, I think I've been here around the same time frame that she was mentioning in terms of kind of the fire and fury into the Trump era of diplomacy. I feel that now it's really hard to see any movement. The way things really do seem kind of locked into place, and with what we were talking about earlier, now that Russia and China are seem to be leveling up to some extent their support of North Korea, that seems to give Pyongyang more of a runway as it's developing its nuclear weapons. I mean, Kim Jong-un clearly is not interested in responding to any kind of overtures from South Korea or Washington to sit down at the negotiating table. I mean, clearly they seem, North Korea seems to have a very specific end goal or series of developments that they want to nail down, I think, before they have any interest in talking again, proving that they can perhaps mount and deliver a nuclear warhead, maybe proving their tactical nuclear weapons capability for their capacity to strike South Korea. As Nicola mentioned, I'm sure that they're kind of keeping an eye on the US election. I mean, that could certainly change the geopolitical atmosphere quite a bit. I would say that China clearly has probably the most potential influence on North Korea, but we're also not really seeing them. They seem to be more kind of using North Korea or going along with North Korea at the moment, and maybe that somehow fits into where they're, positioning themselves. So it's really tough. I mean, it does almost feel like it's this Cold War era, kind of frozen. I mean, but it's a weapon, it's an arms race, almost weapons buildup. I mean, the South and the U.S. are clearly showing a greater, determination to be aggressive in deterrence, and they're responding sort of every time North Korea does another weapons test. And it's I think there is also a train of thought that maybe this just ends up resolving itself by something happening internally in North Korea. I mean, the North is clearly, using a lot of its resources to develop its weapons program at the expense of just food supplies and just living conditions for its people. So, I mean, I don't know how explicitly this will be stated either, but I think there is some sense that maybe pushing that, keeping that rolling will kind of exacerbate situations within Pyongyang. Otherwise, I think it's, unless something big happens, maybe we have to wait for another kind of milestone event to revisit.
Right, hopefully another 6-party talks then. I remember thinking back then when I was covering it was a daunting task they had, but now if you think about it, we were maybe a step closer to seeing some kind of diffusing tensions than we are right now.
It's hard to imagine all those parties
coming
together again. I mean, we are seeing this, like China and Russia were at a different place in those days. Now it's like clearly they've
Right,
sort of
indeed.
drawn a line, yeah.
Of course. Nicola, let's now move on to a concerning but more domestic-centered issue. Korea's population shrank for the second year in a row in 2022 amid a critically low birth rate, according to Statistics Korea last Thursday. Based on your observation here in the country, Nicola, what do you propose to deal with this particular challenge?
That's another big challenge, another big question. Really, there's no quick fix. It has to be a response from the whole of society, not just government. And South Korea may actually be looking now at mitigation measures as well, rather than trying to reverse this dire birth rate scenario. That said, there are certain measures that can be taken, and the government has said that the next 5-year window is critical. They've suggested things like reducing a tax burden on gifts to young newlyweds. There's obvious things that you can do in terms of making more affordable childcare options, and also looking at housing and trying to make more available and affordable housing for young couples, for young people who are finding it very difficult to put up, especially with huge deposits, to just rent a place. So those are the kind of things that you could look at. But also there has to be a change in workplace culture as well, and that's really on private companies to encourage employees to have a better work-life balance, to encourage women to come back to work after they've given birth. Because you look at young women now and they spend so much time studying. It's a very competitive environment. They pour all of their energy and efforts into getting good results in their exams, getting a good job, and then very often they're expected to give that up when they have a child. And so that kind of atmosphere has to change, just the societal approach to women and how they take on more of the burden of household chores and raising the children. And also the education system. There's so much pressure on children in the education system that there was a recent survey among young parents saying about 50% of them said they didn't want the same education pressures for their children that they'd faced. And so that's something that really needs to be looked at, because there's also a lot of pressure on the parents to then pay up a lot of money for cram schools, and that's something that's certainly a disincentive to having children. And then finally, I would say that Korea does have to look more at easing immigration restrictions as well, and that would be part of the mitigation strategy, and not just to allow foreign nannies to come here, but just in the wider sense of immigration.
Right, and staying with what Nicola just mentioned, Thomas, there is talk here in the country about introducing foreign nannies to encourage couples to have more children. What are your thoughts?
Right, well, the Ministry of Labor actually did announce a pilot program this week, and it will be around 100 foreign domestic workers from a range of countries, I think mostly Southeast Asia, like Philippines seems to be one of the major ones. It's going to be like a 6-month trial, I guess. Again, it's more on the lines of a mitigation measure. I mean, I think it does also, as Nicola mentioned, just getting more foreign workers in Korea in general is going to be, something that needs to be looked at, I think, going forward. How much this is going to move the needle, I don't know. I mean, I'm curious to see, because I wonder, obviously there is a need for childcare support. I think when they announced this pilot program, they were talking about how, the current wave of existing domestic workers are sort of aging out, and there's not really like a demand from younger local people to fill those jobs. And anything, I think, to ease the burden of working women in terms of childcare would be welcomed. I don't know how much Korean parents are going to really embrace this. I mean, to be honest, there's when push comes to shove, there hasn't been a great sort of acceptance or integration of foreign, like immigration communities in Korea in general, and especially something so close to home. I mean, I have read there are some, people do express some concerns about that. It will be interesting to see. I don't think it's going to be something that majorly moves the needle. And again, as Nicola mentioned, a lot of these other sort of programs that could need to be, I think, implemented to try and make it easier for people to have children. I mean, the only other thing I would add to that is that when you look at developed countries in, say, Europe that have higher, birth rates, a lot of times, that coincides with just greater gender equality, greater acceptance of non-traditional families. I mean, here it's very hard for, unmarried couples can't adopt, and single parents is sort of looked down upon, not to mention same-sex marriage. So those kinds of family structures and just, the ability for women to have, not carry all the burden of raising children and feel that they're sacrificing their careers. Like countries like France or Nordic countries seem to have, maintained a higher level of birth rate, even though they're as economically developed. And so that seems, that's pointed to as one of the key factors, which is not easy to, wave your hand and change in the society, but...
Right, of course not. But as long as we know that talk has started and discussions are being undertaken, we can hope for some best results in the near future then.
Well, we can hope for it, for sure.
Keep our fingers crossed for that. All right, then, as always, thank you very much, Thomas, for your time and your thoughts. And Nicola, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Right, well, on that note, we end this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow, that is Thursday.
Hello, I'm Hyundai Müller, Ambassador of Slovenia to the Republic of Korea. Right now, I see Korea shining